I live in Asheville, North Carolina, off Marymount Avenue, and for most of my adult life, the woods have been the one place I actually feel calm. I'm a physical therapist at Mission Hospital. I work Tuesday through Saturday, and my weekends off are Sunday and Monday, which means I usually hike alone because none of my friends have the same days off as me. I'm telling you that not because it matters to the story, but because I want you to understand that I've been doing this a long time. I'm not someone who wandered into the backcountry with no idea what I was doing. I've been solo backpacking since I was 22. I'm 31 now. I know how to read a topo map. I know how to purify water. I carry a Garmin in reach for emergencies, and I've never once, before this trip, felt unsafe in the woods. This happened in October of 2024, the second weekend of the month, when the leaves were just starting to turn but hadn't peaked yet. I decided to do a 2-night trip on the Art Loeb Trail in Pisgah National Forest, starting from the Black Balsam Knob trailhead off the Blue Ridge Parkway, planning to camp near Sam Knob the first night and push toward Shining Rock the second. I've hiked this section probably 6 or 7 times. It's popular, not empty wilderness, but it thins out a lot on weekdays, and I was going up on a Thursday specifically to avoid crowds. I got to the trailhead around 1:40 in the afternoon. I remember the time because I texted my sister, Rachel, a photo of the parking lot with the caption, "Off-grid till Saturday, don't worry if you don't hear from me," which is something I always do before a trip. She texted back a thumbs up. That was the last text I sent for 2 days. The hike-in was uneventful. Cold, maybe upper 40s, that kind of high elevation cold that gets into your fingers even when you're moving. The balsam firs up there have this smell after a cold snap, almost like Christmas trees mixed with wet stone, and I remember thinking the trip was already worth it just for that smell. I passed maybe 4 other groups on the way in, all-day hikers, nobody camping. I set up camp a little after 4 p.m. in a spot I'd used before, a flat clearing just off the trail near Sam Knob, maybe a quarter mile down a spur path, far enough from the main trail that you wouldn't stumble onto it unless you knew it was there. That's actually part of why I liked it. Privacy. I had my tent up, a 2-person Big Agnes I use even though I'm alone because I like the extra gear room, and I'd started boiling water for dinner when I heard someone on the spur trail. I want to be clear that this didn't scare me at first. People use that spur sometimes. There's a view a little further down. A guy came into the clearing, maybe mid-40s, wearing a green canvas jacket and carrying what looked like an actual external frame pack, the old aluminum kind you don't see much anymore. He had a full beard, mostly gray, and a rifle slung across his back, which isn't unusual up there during hunting season, though bow season hadn't quite lined up with rifle season at that point, so I remember registering that as slightly odd and then dismissing it. He stopped at the edge of my clearing and just looked at my tent for a second before he said, "Didn't expect anybody back here." I said something like, "Yeah, I like this spot. It's quiet." Normal hiker small talk. He nodded, looked around the clearing slowly, like he was cataloging it, and then he said, "You're camping alone?" I lied. I said my boyfriend was filtering water down at the creek and would be back any minute. It's something I always do when I'm solo, and a strange man asks that question. It's just automatic at this point. Every woman who backpacks alone has that lie ready. He nodded again, said, "All right," and then instead of continuing down the spur toward the view, he turned around and went back the way he came, back toward the main trail. I didn't think much. I finished cooking, ate, read for a bit in my tent with a headlamp, and was asleep by around 9:30. I woke up at 2:13 a.m. I know the exact time because I looked at my phone, and this detail has stuck with me more than almost anything else that weekend, because I woke up not from a sound, but from the specific, sudden absence of one. The wind had been steady all night, moving through the balsams in that constant low roar you get at elevation, and it had just stopped, dead calm. And in that calm, I could hear breathing outside my tent that wasn't mine, not right up against the fabric. Maybe 8 or 10 feet away, near the tree line. Slow, even breathing, like someone standing still and just watching. I lay there completely frozen for probably a full minute, telling myself it was a deer, telling myself deer breathe loud sometimes, telling myself all the reasonable things you tell yourself at 2 a.m. in a tent by yourself. Then I heard a foot shift on the leaf litter, 1 step. Deliberate, not a deer's 4-beat gait. 1 single human footstep, and then nothing again. I didn't move. I didn't turn my headlamp on. I just lay there with my hand on my bear spray, which I always keep inside my sleeping bag with me, listening to my own pulse in my ears for what felt like 20 minutes, but was probably 5. Eventually, I heard the footsteps retreat, unhurried, back down the spur trail toward the main trail. Not running, not sneaking really, just walking away like someone who'd finished doing whatever they came to do. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat up with my headlamp off and my knife open, which I know sounds paranoid. And at the time, I was telling myself I was being paranoid, that it was probably a bear or an elk, that the footsteps sound was my imagination filling in gaps. By the time the sky started going gray around 6:40, I'd basically talked myself back into a version of calm, packed up fast, and decided I'd just push on towards Shining Rock a day early and put some miles between me and that clearing. Here's where it gets worse. When I was breaking down my tent, I noticed something at the edge of the clearing I hadn't seen the night before because I hadn't had a reason to look. A line of small stones, maybe 6 or 7 of them, arranged in a rough arc facing my tent, each one about the size of a golf ball, spaced maybe a foot apart. They looked deliberate, not like something that occurs naturally on a forest floor. I stood there staring at them for probably a full minute, myself they were nothing. Maybe left by another hiker, maybe kids, maybe I just never noticed them the day before in the low light. I took a photo of them on my phone, which I still have, and honestly, looking at that photo now doesn't tell you much of anything. It just looks like rocks. I hiked out towards Shining Rock that morning faster than I normally would, and I want to be honest that I was scared in a way I'd never really been scared in the woods before. Not a jumpy kind of scared, but a heavy, settled dread that sat in my stomach the whole way. I passed 2-day hiking groups around mid-morning, chatted with them normally, felt a little better being around people, and by early afternoon, I'd made it to a camp spot near Shining Rock Gap, a much more open, exposed area with several established tent pads, more the kind of place where you'd expect other campers. There was one other tent already there when I arrived, a small green one-person tent pitched near the tree line, but no one around it. I set up on the opposite side of the clearing, closer to the trail, telling myself that was just a coincidence of timing, that whoever it was had probably gone up to the summit for the sunset views everyone goes there for. Around 6 p.m., a man came walking up from the direction of the Balds. Same green canvas jacket, same beard, same rifle. I felt my whole body go cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. He walked directly across the clearing, not toward his tent, but toward mine, and stopped maybe 15 feet away. "Boyfriend catch up to you?" he said. I remember my mouth was so dry I could barely answer. I said something like, "He's coming up behind me, slower pace," and I could hear how thin my own voice sounded saying it. He just looked at me for a few seconds, long enough that it stopped being a normal amount of eye contact between strangers and became something else. Then he said, "Long way to come by yourself," and turned and walked back to his tent. I did not stay at that. I want you to understand how much of a decision that was, because it was already getting toward evening, and hiking after dark in the backcountry is something I actively try never to do, for 100 good reasons that have nothing to do with strangers. But I broke camp in about 11 minutes, threw everything into my pack without organizing it properly, and started hiking back toward the trailhead where I'd started, which was roughly 5 miles away, most of it exposed balds with no tree cover, and a drop in temperature that was already starting as the sun got low. I sent an SOS-adjacent message on my Garmin InReach to my sister. Not a full emergency SOS because I wasn't in a medical crisis, but a preset message that said, "Heading back to car early, will explain, don't worry," along with my GPS coordinates, because I wanted a paper trail of exactly where I was in case anything happened. She texted back almost immediately asking why, and I typed out badly, cold hands making the screen keyboard a nightmare to use, that a man at my campsite was freaking me out and I was hiking out. I hiked the last 5 miles in progressively worsening dark, headlamp on, moving fast, checking behind me constantly. Around mile 3, on an open stretch of the Bald near Tennant Mountain, I looked back and saw a light. Not close, maybe a quarter mile behind me, bobbing in that specific rhythm a headlamp has when someone's walking, not running, just walking at a steady pace. I sped up. When I checked again 10 minutes later, the light was still there, same distance, same pace, matching mine almost exactly, like whoever it was had also sped up. I did something I'm not proud of and that I don't fully recommend, but I turned my own headlamp off and moved by moonlight and the ambient light off the Balds for probably 15 minutes, cutting my pace, but trying to become harder to track, before turning it back on once I was back in tree cover. I don't know if that did anything. I don't know if the light behind me ever noticed. I never saw it again after that, but I also never stopped. I got back to the Black Balsam Trailhead parking lot at 9:52 p.m. My car was the only one there. I remember sitting in the driver's seat with the doors locked, engine running for the heat, shaking so hard my teeth were actually chattering, and it wasn't from the cold anymore. I called the Haywood County Sheriff's non-emergency line from the parking lot because I had 1 bar of service right at that spot and told the dispatcher what happened. She was kind, took my information, said someone would follow up, and asked if I wanted to file a report, even though, as she gently pointed out, nothing had technically happened. No threats made, no physical contact, no crime committed that they could act on beyond a wellness check on a camper who hadn't done anything illegal. I understood that even as I was frustrated by it, a man asking questions and looking at you too long isn't a crime. Neither is hiking behind someone at a distance on a public trail. A ranger did call me back 2 days later. He told me they'd checked the Shining Rock area and found the green tent still there, empty, no one around, gear packed up neat like whoever it was had left in a hurry or just moved on. No name on any permit. That section doesn't require one. No vehicle they could tie to a specific person at either trailhead. He said, and I remember this almost word for word because it unsettled me more than anything else in the whole ordeal. We get guys like that sometimes. Usually harmless. Usually. I never went back to the trail. I still hike, still camp, but I don't go alone as often anymore. And when I do, I don't tell strangers anything true about myself. Not even small things. I check tree lines now in a way I never used to. Sometimes, at home, in my own apartment, if it's quiet enough and the heat kicks off and there's a gap of true silence, I catch myself listening for a footstep that isn't there. The stones still bother me the most, if I'm honest. I've read since then that hunters sometimes use rock cairns or line markers for sighting distances, or that it could have been left over from something totally mundane, kids messing around, another camper marking a tent pad. I've never gotten a straight answer, and I never will, because I never went back to check if they were still there. Part of me doesn't want to know. Part of me thinks that if I'm off Sam Knob, even now, even years later, I find the same 7 stones in the same arc, facing whatever spot a tent would go. I don't know who that man was. I don't know what he wanted, or if he wanted anything at all beyond making a woman camping alone feel unsafe, which, if that's all it was, he succeeded at completely. I've told this story to maybe 4 people since it happened, and every single one of them asks the same question at the end, which is, did you ever find out who he was? And every single time I have to tell them no, I never did. Story 2. Wolf Creek, Kentucky. I need to start by saying I still live about 20 minutes from where this happened, in a town called Corbin, Kentucky, and I still drive past the turnoff for the trail almost every week because it's on the way to my mom's house. I'm 28 now. At the time this happened, in September of 2023, I was 25, working as a vet tech at a small animal clinic in London, Kentucky, the town next door, and I'd just gotten into trail running seriously that spring. Not racing, nothing competitive, just something to clear my head after a divorce that had finalized about 4 months earlier. My ex and I had been together since high school, and running alone in the woods had become the one part of my day that felt like it belonged only to me. The trail I'm talking about is in the Daniel Boone National Forest, off a gravel access road that splits from Highway 90 near the Cumberland River, not far from the Wolf Creek area. It's not a heavily system, more of a network of old logging roads and game trails that locals use, mostly hunters and a handful of mountain bikers, and I liked it specifically because I almost never saw another person out there. I'd run it probably 3 times a week for months by the time this happened, usually in the early evening after my shift ended around 5:30, giving myself an hour or so of daylight in September. The first strange thing happened on a Tuesday, and at the time I didn't think of it as strange at all. I was about 2 miles in on a stretch where the old logging road cuts along a ridge above a dry creek bed, and I passed a trail camera strapped to a tree, the kind hunters use to scout deer patterns before bow season opens in Kentucky, which is usually early September. I'd seen trail cameras out there before. It's completely normal. I didn't think anything of it, just kept running. 2 days later, on the Thursday, I noticed the same camera had been moved. Not far, maybe 15 feet down the trail, and angled differently, no longer pointed out across the creek bed the way a hunter would set it up to scout game, but angled down the trail itself, toward oncoming foot traffic, toward runners, toward me specifically, since almost nobody else used that stretch. I remember stopping and actually looking at it for a second, and feeling a small, cold prickle of something, before telling myself I was being ridiculous, that hunters adjust cameras all the time. That's literally what scouting is. The following week, I started noticing small things accumulate in a way that's hard to explain individually, but that added up to a feeling I couldn't shake. A granola bar wrapper I was positive I hadn't dropped, sitting neatly on a flat rock near a spot I always stopped to stretch, like it had been placed there rather than littered. A section of trail that was usually overgrown with waist-high weeds that I noticed had been freshly cut back, just along about a 30-yard stretch, like someone had gone through with a machete or brush cutter to clear sight lines. I told myself that was trail maintenance. I told myself a lot of things. The night everything changed was a Thursday, September 21st, And I remember the date because it was 2 days before my ex-husband's birthday, which I'd spent all day trying not to think about. I got to the trailhead later than usual, around 6:15, because I'd stayed late at the clinic dealing with an emergency GI surgery on a lab that had eaten a sock. The light was already going gold and low, that late September slant that makes everything look warmer than it feels, and it was maybe 68 degrees, cooling fast. I told myself I'd just do a quick 3 miles instead of my usual 5 out and back and be done before full dark. About 1.5 miles in, right around where the trail cameras had been, I heard a branch snap off to my left, deep in the trees, maybe 50 yards off the trail. I stopped running, stood there breathing hard, sweat cooling fast on my neck, listening. Nothing. I told myself there are a lot of deer out there. It's genuinely the most likely explanation for 90% of woods noises, and kept going. About 1/4 mile further, I heard it again, closer this time, and this time, along with the branch snap, I heard something that didn't sound like a deer at all. A long, low exhale, almost a sigh, coming from roughly the same direction, human sounding. I stopped dead in the trail. My music, I'd had one earbud in, an old habit I've since broken completely, was still playing tinny and distant in my ear. And I remember reaching up and pulling it out with a shaking hand so I could hear better. And in that silence, I heard footsteps, not running, walking, but fast, moving parallel to the trail, through the trees, keeping pace with roughly where I'd stopped. I did not scream. I want to be honest that my instinct wasn't fight or flight in any dramatic sense. It was this strange, focused calm, almost like my body decided panicking wasn't useful yet. I turned around and started running back the way I'd come, toward the trailhead, toward my car, at a pace I don't think I've hit before or since. And the footsteps in the trees sped up too. They weren't trying to catch me, or if they were, they weren't succeeding because I was moving faster than someone bushwhacking through undergrowth reasonably could, but they were paralleling me. I could hear branches whipping, hear breathing that wasn't mine, off to my left, sometimes falling back a little, sometimes gaining, for what felt like forever, but according to my running watch, was about 6 minutes before the sounds just stopped. No fade out. Just stopped. Like whoever it was had halted, or cut away from the trail entirely. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I remember fumbling my keys so badly, I dropped them in the gravel, had to feel around for them with my hands shaking, got in, locked the doors, and sat there gasping with the engine not even started yet, staring at the tree line where the trail emerged, waiting to see if anyone came out of it. Nobody did. I sat there for probably 10 minutes before I trusted my hands enough to drive. I called the Laurel County Sheriff's Office that night from my apartment, and a deputy actually drove out to meet me at the trailhead the next morning before my shift. He walked the first mile or so with me, and we found the trail camera again, now moved a third time, this time positioned almost directly over the trail itself, mounted higher, angled down, which he agreed was an unusual setup for hunting purposes. He took photos of it and said he'd try to check for a hunting license or camera registration tied to the area. Though he also told me, and this is something that's stuck with me since, that trail cameras on national forest land don't require any kind of registration or ID tag under current regulations, so there was genuinely no way to trace who it belonged to just from finding it. It was just a camera, nothing illegal. He also, gently, asked if I had an ex or anyone who might want to scare me, which under different circumstances might have felt like a reasonable question, but at the time felt like a small, quiet horror all its own. The idea that someone I knew might be capable of following me through the woods in the dark. I told him about my divorce. He said he'd note it, but that without more to go on, there wasn't much they could actively investigate. I stopped running that trail after that, obviously, but the thing that really got under my skin happened about 10 days later, in early October. I was at the grocery store in London, a Kroger off Highway 25, on a Tuesday evening, standing in the checkout line, and a man 2 lanes over was buying a case of water and some rope, ordinary hardware store rope. Nothing dramatic about that at all. And I glanced up because something about him made the hair go up on my arms before I'd even consciously registered why. He was maybe mid-30s, wearing a camo jacket, and he was looking at me, not glancing, looking, steady, the way you look at something you recognize. I looked away fast, heart pounding, telling myself it was nothing, telling myself plenty of men wear camo in Kentucky, telling myself I was seeing threats everywhere now because of what had happened on the trail, which is a completely reasonable thing for your brain to start doing after something like that. When I looked back up a minute later, he was gone. Not in line anymore. Not visible in the parking lot when I got to my car either, though I sat in the driver's seat for a solid 2 minutes scanning before I pulled out. I never saw that man again. Or at least, I never saw anyone I could say for certain was him. I moved to a different apartment complex about 4 months later, on the other side of London, for reasons I told myself were about wanting a bigger kitchen. Though if I'm honest, part of it was that the woods behind my old complex backed up almost directly onto that same section of national forest, close enough that I used to be able to see the tree line from my bedroom window. And after that fall, I stopped being able to sleep with the blinds open. I still run, but only on paved greenways now, always with my phone visible in an armband. Sometimes with a friend from the clinic who took up running with me that winter, mostly I think, because I asked her to without ever fully explaining why. I've never gone back to that trail. I drive past the gravel turnoff to it several times a week on my way to my mom's, and every single time, without fail, I glance down that road for just a second, like some part of my brain is checking whether the camera is still there, still angled at the empty trail, waiting for someone to run past it again. I never found out who was in the trees that night. I never found out if the man in the grocery store had anything to do with it at all, or if I built a connection between two unrelated things out of leftover fear, which is entirely possible and something I've had to sit with. The deputy's report, as far as I know, was never followed up on beyond that first visit, because there was, in the end, nothing concrete to follow. Just a camera nobody claimed, a set of footsteps that matched my pace exactly through dense trees in near dark, and a stranger's face I still see sometimes when I close my eyes at night, looking at me over a case of water like he already knew something about me that I didn't. Story 3. Hemlock, Bluffs, Oregon. I want to preface this by saying I've gone back and forth for 2 years about whether to write this down anywhere, because I still don't have an ending for it, and I know that's unsatisfying. But I think about it enough that I'd rather get it out than keep carrying it around unspoken. I live in Estacada, Oregon, a small town about an hour southeast of Portland, right at the edge of the Mount Hood National Forest. I'm a lineman for Portland General Electric, which means I spend a lot of my working life outdoors already, in rough terrain, sometimes alone, so I want to be upfront that I'm not someone who spooks easily in the woods. And this is a big part of why what happened has stayed with me the way it has. In the summer of 2025, I was 29, recently single after a long relationship ended, living alone in a rented house off Wade Creek Road, and I'd started doing overnight solo trips into the forest on my days off, mostly along the Clackamas River drainage, sometimes further up toward the Bull of the Woods wilderness. I'd bought a truck bed camper setup that spring, nothing fancy, just enough to sleep in comfortably and drive gravel Forest Service roads to places most day hikers never bother reaching. I like the isolation. After the breakup, I think I actively sought it out. This happened over a long weekend at the end of July, a Friday through Sunday. I'd driven up Forest Road 46 and then cut onto one of the unnumbered spur roads that split off it, a rough gravel track that eventually dead ends at an old clear cut from decades back, now grown in with alder and vine maple, with a decent flat spot where I'd camped once before, maybe 8 months earlier, in the fall. It's not an official campsite. No sign, no fire ring built by the Forest Service, nothing. Just a flat patch of ground maybe 40 feet off the spur road that other people clearly used sometimes, based on an old blackened fire ring someone had built out of creek rocks. I got there around 4 p.m. on the Friday, backed the truck in, set up my camp chair, started a small fire once I confirmed there wasn't a burn ban in effect that week, and settled in with a book and a couple of beers, enjoying what felt like total solitude. I didn't see another vehicle on the spur road the entire drive-in, and I didn't hear one pass while I sat there through the evening. That mattered later, because of what I found. Around 9:40 p.m., full dark by then, I walked maybe 30 yards into the trees to relieve myself, headlamp on low, and on my way back to camp, my light caught something nailed to a tree just off the edge of my clearing that I hadn't noticed when I set up camp in daylight. A child's shoe. A single, small sneaker, maybe a toddler's size. Pink, with a cartoon character on it I didn't recognize, nailed through the heel to the trunk of a hemlock at about eye level, hanging upside down. I want to be honest that my first reaction wasn't fear, so much as confusion. The kind of confusion where your brain just refuses to build a story around what it's seeing because none of the available stories are good ones. I stood there staring at it for probably a full minute. It wasn't old. The shoe wasn't sun-bleached or weathered, the laces were still bright white, and the nail looked fresh. No rust on it that I could see in the headlamp beam. Someone had put that there recently, maybe days, maybe hours. I went back to my fire and sat down and tried to think through it rationally, the way I imagine most people would. Kids lose shoes in the woods, sure, but shoes don't nail themselves to trees. I told myself it was some kind of trail marker, maybe hunters or off-roaders using it as a landmark for the spur road, a weird tradition I just wasn't familiar with. I've heard of stranger things marking forest roads out here. I've personally seen boots nailed to trees along logging roads before. Actually, it's an old tradition among loggers and hunters in parts of the Pacific Northwest, usually work boots, marking a favorite camp or hunting spot. I held on to that explanation hard. because the alternative wasn't something I wanted to think about while sitting alone in the dark 40 feet from it. I didn't sleep well. I kept the fire going later than I normally would, fed it more than I needed to, and eventually climbed into the truck camper a little after midnight, locking the tailgate and camper shell door behind me, which I don't usually bother doing out there. I woke up at 3:47 a.m. to the sound of a vehicle. Not driving past, idling, close. I could hear gravel popping under tires, the specific low rumble of a diesel engine, and headlights sweeping briefly across the inside of my camper shell through the small side window before cutting off. Whoever it was had pulled onto the spur, stopped maybe 20 or 30 feet from my truck, based on the sound, and turned their engine. I lay completely still in the dark, listening. The door opened. I remember the specific creak and thunk of an older truck door, not a modern, quiet one, and then footsteps on gravel, unhurried, walking around. I heard them circle what I was almost certain was my own truck, slow, deliberate, pausing at points like someone looking through windows. I had my phone in my hand, no signal at all out there, which I already knew from checking earlier, and I remember the specific sick feeling of watching the no service icon and realizing that whatever was about to happen, I was going to have to handle it completely alone. The footsteps stopped near the back of the camper, right by the tailgate, close enough that I could hear breathing through the thin metal, slow and even, unbothered, like someone standing patiently. I did not move. I did not make a sound. I lay there gripping a fixed-blade knife I keep in the camper for general use. Not even really a weapon in my mind until that exact moment, and I stayed frozen for what my phone later told me was almost 40 minutes, the breathing and the occasional shift of gravel under boots continuing on and off that entire time, sometimes moving away toward my fire ring, sometimes coming back close to the truck. At one point, and this is the detail that still bothers me the most out of the entire experience, I heard a voice, low, almost conversational, say something I couldn't make out except for two words that came through clearly. Still here. I don't know if he was talking to himself, or to someone else who I never heard, or on a radio, or if I even heard it correctly at all, half asleep and terrified in the dark. But I heard those two words, and I've never been able to explain them to myself in a way that makes me feel better. Around 4:30 a.m., I heard the truck door again, the engine start, and the vehicle pull away back down the spur road, gravel crunching, headlights sweeping across the trees this time instead of my camper, fading, then gone. I did not get out. I did not sleep again. I lay there until the sky started going gray around 5:15, and only then did I ease the tailgate open and look around. My camp chair had been moved, not knocked over, moved, repositioned to face directly toward the truck, like someone had sat in it. My cooler, which I'd left closed and latched by the fire ring, was open, lid propped against a rock, though as far as I could tell, nothing had been taken from it. And the fire ring itself had fresh wood added to it, several split logs I hadn't put there, stacked neatly, unburned. I broke camp in under 10 minutes. I didn't make coffee, didn't eat, just threw everything loose into the truck bed and drove out of there faster than that gravel road really allows. And I didn't feel like I could breathe right until I hit pavement on Forest Road 46 almost 20 minutes later, at which point I pulled over into a gravel pullout and just sat there shaking for a while before continuing on. I called the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office once I had signal and reported it, including the shoe nailed to the tree, which I'll admit felt like a strange thing to say out loud to a dispatcher, strange enough that I heard a pause on the line before she asked me to repeat it. A deputy did follow up with me by phone 2 days later, said they'd sent someone out to check the area and confirmed the shoe was still there, still nailed to the tree, but that without any other evidence, no missing child reports matching that shoe in the region, no vehicle description beyond older diesel truck, no plate, no clear crime committed against me personally, there wasn't an active case they could build. He did tell me, somewhat carefully, that they were aware of occasional similar reports from campers in that general drainage over the past couple of years, though he wouldn't specify what those reports involved, and I got the distinct sense he'd already said more than he was supposed to. I drove back out to that spur road once more, about 6 weeks later, in September, not to camp, just to look, because I couldn't stop thinking about the shoe, and I needed to know if it had really been there, if I hadn't somehow imagined the whole thing during a bad sleepless night alone in the woods. It was gone. The nail was still in the tree. I found it, a single rusted nail at eye height on a hemlock trunk, exactly where I remembered. But the shoe itself was gone, no sign of it having fallen or been removed carelessly, just an empty nail in a tree in an empty clearing. Birds going about their business, sun coming down through the canopy in ordinary, unremarkable columns of light, like nothing had ever happened there at all. I still work up in that district sometimes for PGE, running lines through access roads not far from where all this happened, and there's a specific kind of quiet in certain parts of that forest now that I physically cannot be alone in anymore. I've told my crew foreman I won't take solo assignments in that drainage, and he's never asked why, which I'm grateful for, because I don't think I could explain it in a way that wouldn't sound unhinged. I don't camp alone anymore at all, honestly. Not out there, not anywhere. I never found out who the shoe belonged to. I never found out who was outside my truck that night, or what "still here" meant, or who he might have been talking to when he said it. I've turned that phrase over in my head more times than I can count, at 2 or 3 in the morning, lying in my own bed in town with the doors locked and the porch light on, and I've never landed on an explanation that lets me stop thinking about it. If any of these stories hit a little too close to home, or if you camp alone, and now you're double-checking your tent zipper tonight, that's exactly what these are supposed to do. As always, if you have your own true story from the woods, from a night shift, from a stranger who wouldn't stop looking at you a beat too long, drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and some of the best episodes on this channel started as a comment just like that. If you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications because we post new true horror stories every week. And if you made it this far, do me a favor, like the video. It actually helps more than you'd think. Stay safe out there, and maybe don't camp alone this week. I'll see you in the next one.